Apologies for that. Our MC was just on mute at the moment, but it's just reached our starting time today, so we'd like to begin today's session. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Ayumi of FOE Japan, and I will be chairing today's session. So now we are approaching the 10th year since the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Today, it's actually exactly yesterday, 9.5 years since the disaster. So this is an opportunity to hear the voices of people still in Fukushima affected by the ongoing disaster. And through cooperation with Peaceboat, we're holding this seminar with interpretation simultaneously into English as well, so that we can share these voices with people around the world as well. As you can see, we have more than 140 people who are joining the session today. I think most people are probably fairly used to using Zoom by now, but we just like to explain briefly here as well how to use the interpretation. Of course, those of you who are hearing our voices at the moment are understanding how to use this. But if those of you who would like to hear in English, you can see the information here as well, just to make sure that you can select the English and follow the discussion today. There may be some people joining partway through the event as well. So within the chat, if you have any questions about the interpretation or any issues in listening and so on, then please feel free to jump in there as well. So we'd like to ask all participants to keep their microphones on mute during the main part of today's session. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, of course, there's a small microphone symbol on the left, so that's how you can select whether you're on mute or not. So if possible, we'd like to ask you to stay on mute during the main part today. You can feel free to have your camera on or off, whichever is more comfortable for you. During the Q&A session afterwards, of course, it's not possible to answer every question all at once. So we'd like to ask people to use the raise hand function if possible, so that you can indicate that you do have a question that you'd like to ask. So we're just checking in at the moment with how to explain this. If you click on the participants button on the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or it might be the three little dots to explain for details if you're on a smaller screen. On there, it will bring up the list of all of the names of participants, and there should be a little symbol saying raise hand, or sometimes it's a little picture of a hand actually as well. So you'll see that, and then you can use this in order to indicate that you would like to ask a question to the speakers. If you're joining on a program that doesn't have that and so on, you can also feel free to raise a question using the chat. And you can write that in English, and we can share that as well. So just to explain briefly the program for today, the main presentations will actually be broadcast on FOE Japan's Japanese language Facebook. We'll make sure, however, that the faces and names of participants are not shown in public in that view as well. And the Q&A will be conducted only for those of you who are joining the Zoom at the moment. That will not be broadcast live online to others who are not registered. So we'll explain today's agenda. As you can hear, we'll have a brief introduction about FOE Japan, first of all, and about our project, which is Educa project, or Making Fukushima More Visible is the literal translation of this. After that, we'll hear from Kanna Mitsuta, who is the Secretary General of FOE Japan, about some of the different challenges which are existing now, 10 years, as we're approaching 10 years since the disaster. And from there, we will hear from Ms. Ruiko Muto to hear our first voice from Fukushima. And actually 5 and 6, the order of these is actually different to what's being here on the screen. First of all, we will hear from a mother in Fukushima, then have a very brief, just a few minutes film screening, and go into the Q&A session from there. So I'll explain just briefly a little bit about Friends of the Earth Japan first. We're, of course, organizing today's event. FOE Japan is the Japanese branch or the member of Friends of the Earth International. It was founded in Japan in 1971 and is based in Tokyo, conducting various different environmental and social related programs. Our office is in Itabashi in Tokyo, and that's where I'm speaking to you all from today as well. So FOE, or Friends of the Earth, is of course working together as a global movement, as a member with different organizations all around the world. Today, we're of course speaking about nuclear power, but we're also working on climate change, on development finance, looking at Japanese, both private and government. When Japan is investing overseas, making sure that there are not environmental impacts or human rights violations and so on, conducting different research, policy recommendations, advocacy, and also working on various different issues to do with sustainability. Today's topic is focusing on the Fukushima nuclear disaster, of course. We, especially this year, have been putting a lot of energy into what we are calling the Miharu project, or making Fukushima visible. The reason that we give it such a name is, well, of course, it's now more than 9 years since the disaster. And so what is still happening in Fukushima and the impacts, the damage caused by the nuclear disaster is being less and less reported. Actually, the focus is just on the recovery or on the Olympics, or trying to give this impression that the impacts of the disaster are not really here anymore and really being made invisible. This is something that we felt very concerned about, and so decided to start this program. As part of, well, this project is quite diverse in many different activities, but working together to interview local community members in Fukushima to report about this, to make videos about this, to convey this in a way that's very easy to understand as well. We have set up also a dedicated website in regards to this. I'd like to just bring that up on the screen now to show you quickly if I can. Can you see here? Yes, so here we can see the Fukushima Educa project website. This is the Japanese website, but there is also the full English page as well. There are very many different interview videos, messages, data, also sharing this kind of information as well. And actually just yesterday, we launched the English page for this. So this is very fresh. It doesn't have all of the same contents yet as the Japanese page, but we are hoping to be able to share this information from Fukushima to audiences around the world as well. So if you click on these different hashtags, for example, you can see different data and facts about the different relevant points as well. So I hope that you can find this useful as well. So these videos, when you click on testimonials, it's actually not only Japanese and English, but each of these is also being made available in French, Korean, Chinese, both traditional, simplified, German, and Spanish as well. And so we hope that this can really be one tool that we can use to share these voices from Fukushima to people around the world. So that brings me to a close for my introduction. And I'll pass over to our first speaker for today, who is Kanna Mitsuta from FOE Japan. Those of you listening in English who had registered in advance, we have actually sent the English version of the slides to the email that you registered with, so feel free to take a look at those yourself. If you haven't received that email, feel free to, actually, we will link the file in the chat as well so that you can download it from there directly. So Kanna Mitsuta, over to you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mitsuta of FOE Japan. I'm very glad to have so many people joining us for the event today. So I will be speaking about the damage caused by the accident at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant and how this is being made invisible. These are some of the main points I would like to talk about today. So about the damage, the evacuation areas, evacuees, thyroid cancer, and the radioactive substances. Looking at, first of all, the current situation, which is still ongoing. The damage is still ongoing. There are many evacuees still who are living in very difficult situations, including financial difficulties as well. They have lost their hometown or furusato, lost their community that they had, and also their relationships with nature as well. Within this as well, they are losing their livelihoods, and many people are even feeling that they are losing their purpose for living in a way as well. For those people who did evacuate but have returned to Fukushima, they are also experiencing very harsh realities. We are seeing, for example, radioactive materials which have been dispersed on very large areas. The decontamination efforts and so on are, well, undergoing. However, looking at how to dispose of the soil which comes up as part of this process, also looking at, for example, the issues of releasing contaminated water into the ocean and so on. There are very many different still concerning issues going on. This slide is also showing the number of deaths which have been designated as disaster-related deaths in Fukushima Prefecture. This is the numbers as of September last year, but there were 2,267 people in Fukushima Prefecture who were determined to have died because of things indirectly related to the Fukushima disaster. Most of these are from within Fukushima or also in neighboring prefectures as well. But we can see in the graph it shows that Fukushima has a much higher number of such related deaths than other Miyagi or Iwate prefectures, for example. So we can see these are also from various psychological and physical problems from a prolonged evacuation or also from example, more than 100 people who have committed suicide as a result of the impacts of the disaster. Looking at the situation now of the radioactive contamination, the air dose rates are decreasing and have continued to decrease, but it has not fallen to the levels of prior to the disaster yet. This slide is from the Minna no Data site, which is a citizens organization conducting radiation monitoring. And this is their measurement map, which is monitoring, which was conducted by different citizens monitoring stations throughout the whole of Japan. We can see on the left, this is March 2011, and the right is showing situation in 2020. We can see, of course, the red or purple countries are, we can see that there are many areas which are still in very serious situations. We can next see also the chronology of the areas under evacuation orders. We can see that these orders are being more and more lifted in many different places. The right, the pink area, is what is being designated as a difficult to return to area. And so this is still the status today. The areas which are under or have been under, evacuation orders are gradually being more and more lifted. And this is something I will speak about a little bit later as well. But the exposure of the standard which is being used by the Japanese government is 20 millisieverts per year. We can see on this graph, it shows the most recent situation. So this is as of March of this year. This is when the Joban train line was being reopened again. And even within this difficult to return area around the station and in some of those areas, there were actually liftings of the evacuation orders or a restriction for entry orders and so on as well. So it's in a way somewhat a symbolic aspect that the train line was reopened and the train station area around there was reopened as well. This is around Futaba and Okuma, and so in these areas which are directly related close to the nuclear power plant. So this is the news really showing this impression that the situation in these areas is now fine. But we can see that there is still just this very small area that has been lifted, and there are still other areas under the orders. This is showing a comparison of the responses following the Chernobyl and Fukushima nuclear disasters, with the left-hand column being in the case of Chernobyl in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, and the right in Japan. Under the Chernobyl law, which was enacted, we could see that those places, for example, up to 5 millisieverts per year had the right to resettle. Or also looking at, in the case of moving or evacuating, there would be various different legal support, economic benefits, the right to resettle, and so on as well. What I'd like to bring attention to is showing that this is not only looking at the exposure, but also having measures in regards to the soil contamination. So that's the 555,000 becquerels per meter squared, for example, which is listed here per meter squared. So the Chernobyl law is also including these standards regarding the soil contamination. But in the case of Japan, it just says that 20 millisieverts per year or greater is the evacuation area. However, there is no standard at all set for soil contamination in the case of Japan. However, if we can see the situation, 20 millisieverts per year is, of course, something which is very different to the international standards of 1 millisievert per year, or 20 times, in fact. And also, the standard for 20 millisieverts per year is that kind of standard for those who are working within radiation control areas, for example. That's actually 5 millisieverts per year. So the fact that the standard for citizens in Japan, for regular residents, is so much higher than even those working in restricted radiation areas is a serious issue. And so the fact that residents and children are being forced to live in such situations is something that in May of 2011, that's what the first left top photograph here is, the sit-in which was held by residents in front of the Ministry for Economics, Trade and Industry, or METI. You can see also this is residents from Minamisoma, the city just to the north of the Fukushima nuclear power plant, saying that these restrictions or these kind of standards are illegal, and that also lifting the evacuation orders is something which is ignoring the will of the local people. At the same time, as these evacuation orders are being lifted, as we can see on this graph, or this map, sorry, it is showing about how many people have actually started to return home to live in these areas. So the green areas, when we put them all together, the overall population of people who have returned to former evacuation areas is just under 30%. So that's the 28% in the top right. And this is also, well, there are people who, other than those who were originally living there, there are some people who have gone to live there, for example, because they are working in relation to the decontamination efforts or related to the nuclear power plant, or some industry or construction related, and so on as well. So actually this number of people returning to live there does include not only those who originally lived there, but others as well. So this is a photograph of the area to enter the difficult to return zone. This is Tomioka, the area which is very famous for, it has a street of cherry blossoms. Actually, this photograph was taken in autumn, so you cannot see the blossoms, but you can really see that there are no people there in what used to be a very bustling area. The feelings of the residents is very complex. These are some quotes from people in the town of Tomioka, of course, saying that they want to protect what we have built from our ancestors over the generations and want to go home. But at the same time, even if they do go home, many of the different houses in the neighborhood are being torn down one after another. Is this really what we mean when we call this reconstruction or recovery? Also, considering the efforts of radiation, I don't think this is an environment where children can live, but I have so many memories in Tomioka, so I do want to go back there one day. These are some of the quotes from the residents of the area. At the same time as well, the overall number of evacuees is also decreasing. The number, however, it's also being made invisible in a way as well, is our understanding. Fukushima Prefecture actually had the goal that by the year 2020, it would have 0 evacuees. This is also meaning that there is different ending of the assistance or government support policies, for example, and a policy to encourage people to return earlier. As of May 2012, this is the official government numbers. So there are, of course, many people who are not actually included in these numbers. But as of May 2012, there was 164,865 people. Then in July of this year, this has fallen to 37,299 people. So we can see the large change here. But these numbers also does not include many different evacuees. For example, those who have evacuated to other parts within the Fukushima prefecture. Also people who have evacuated from areas which were outside of the official evacuation zones, for example, or those people who have moved into public reconstruction housing as well. So they are not included in these numbers. Another issue I would like to share is, as this government support is being terminated, for example, those people from outside, or the voluntary evacuees, as they are called, from outside the evacuation areas, the support for them was cut off or was discontinued in March 2017. However, despite the fact that there was no longer any government support, 80% of people continued to live in evacuation. This, of course, led to many serious financial difficulties for many of them, including falling into poverty. In March 2019, the rent support for low-income evacuees was discontinued. And then in March of 2020, those people who had evacuated from difficult-to-return zones, the provision of temporary housing and rental housing for them was also discontinued. However, the situation that the evacuees are being placed in, of course, we only have very fragmentary information about this. We are calling on the national government to carry out a full survey of the situation of the evacuees so that they can provide full support to them. However, we only actually have studies conducted by individual municipalities. So this is a study which was conducted of those evacuees who moved from outside the evacuation areas, but from within Fukushima to the Tokyo metropolitan area. This is figures from 2017. But we can see here the number of 22% of households who are earning 100,000 yen or less a month, which is very low for Tokyo, a very expensive area. More than 50% of households earning less than 200,000, which is also still very low for Tokyo. There was a so-called verification study which is being conducted by the Niigata Prefecture, which is located just next to Fukushima and where many people have evacuated to. And they are surveying also the different challenges or suffering of the refugees who are living in Niigata. 70% reported that they are feeling grief and conflict over the loss of their hometown. 79% say that they are also feeling economic or financial burdens as well. Also looking at their changes as from before the evacuation, for example, a decrease in the number of people living together in their household. This is showing that people have been forced to live separately from each other. Also, the number of people who were running their own businesses or having regular employment have decreased, while those number in part-time work or also unemployed workers have increased as well, meaning that there was a significant decrease in household income for most of them. There's a private group which is set up as a consultation center, a cooperative center for evacuees. So it's an organization providing different support, and they are also conducting many different surveys for those people who are having difficulties, for example, support for paying rent and so on, and conducting consultation for them. And this is some of the voices being raised to that center. So what is it which is really forcing or putting the evacuees into this difficult situation? The financial support and so on, the difficulties there is due to the discontinuation of government support. But this is also related in a way to overall societal situations. The fact that really the broader society in Japan is treating them as if, they shouldn't need to be living under evacuation anymore. So this is meaning there is also quite a lot of psychological pressure on the evacuees as well, not only financial pressures. Next, I'd like to speak briefly about the thyroid cancer situation. Fukushima Prefecture conducted a survey of people who were 18 years or under at the time of the disaster to carry out surveys of their thyroids. This is carried out round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4 every 2 years. And so this is a graph showing the results of those 4 rounds, so up until 2018. From this, you can see the number of 246 confirmed cases, and through surgery, 199 cases have been confirmed. Looking at this, there is a very significant debate about these results, but the fact that this study is still being continued is something which is very important. The Fukushima Prefectural Health Survey Committee, which is set up by the prefectural government, says that in comparison to the usual situation, we see that this prevalence of thyroid cancer is several times higher than it would be estimated as to other than disaster-affected areas. In the second test round, so this is the evaluation of between the first and second rounds. And then looking at the second round of tests, we can start to see a difference between the different areas within Fukushima, the different 13 municipalities, and also between, for example, the evacuation areas and those that were not as well. So we can also see that the exposure to the radiation doses in the different parts of Fukushima Prefecture is very much in line with these high numbers. But this is still a very simple comparison at this stage. But we do see these higher rates or high detection rates in the regions which did have higher exposure. At the same time, they are still saying that there is no association being recognized between the exposure and the thyroid test. However, if that were the case, if there is several times higher prevalence of thyroid cancer, well, what would be the reason for this? There is a lot of debate and discussion over this at the moment. Initially, people were saying that this was a screening effect, for example. The fact that so much tests were being conducted, that's why so many were found. However, if that were the case on the second, third, and fourth rounds, the fact that this is still being found more doesn't fully explain this as well. The screening effect is not fully enough for this. So the next explanation they're using also is saying that there is, well, excessive diagnosis, shall we say. Many different, very small things have been found, which perhaps wouldn't be detected otherwise. This is what some experts have started to be saying recently. But at the same time, of course, there are, looking at Dr. Suzuki, for example, who is a thyroid cancer surgeon who has actually conducted these tests, he said that 72% of the cases of cancer he reported on had spread to their lymph nodes and 47 had spread to surrounding tissues. And all of the patients did require surgery. So this means that they were not just excessive diagnoses. So I apologize that this graph was not included in the English presentation that was sent by email, but the data itself is in English. This is showing an animation of the dispersion in the atmosphere at the time of the disaster. This is from UNSCARE data, the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. So we can see this is on the Pacific Ocean side, but usually it starts to be on the side of the ocean. However, we can see it spreading also to very significant or large parts of eastern Japan according to the wind direction. This is, of course, to be expected, but we see this situation here. So based upon this, a private fund was established, the 311 Fund for Children with Thyroid Cancer in 2016 to provide support in a broad area of Eastern Japan, which was affected by the radiation at the time as well. So not only Fukushima Prefecture, but also to patients throughout Eastern Japan to, for example, help with medical expenses and treatment and so on. To date, they have helped 161 people. I'm running out of time, but I'll still go through a couple of further points. This is, of course, an issue which is being reported broadly in the media at the moment as well. And about the Alps or contaminated water being treated through the Alps process, which is treated but still contaminated. So the debate is on at the moment about what to do with this water. The tanks, if it continues as it will be full by 2022. And so a decision is said to be needed to be made by the government within this year. And there is very strong debate about this at the moment. This graph shows the production of treated water and the process of the mechanisms as part of this. So we can see this is coming through to the reactor building, has the contaminated water coming through, and then coming through this processing treatment, however, still including tritium and other radioactive materials as well. I'll skip over some of this data for time reasons. There are many different points within this discussion. But other than tritium, there are also many other different kinds of radioactive materials, such as strontium and these other aspects as well, which are also said to be remaining. And it's said that it actually exceeds the standard by about 70% in this water as well. And what is at the highest contamination is actually up to 20,000 times the standard. So TEPCO is saying that it will have a secondary treatment in order to reduce it to the standard levels. However, there are many questions about, well, how much of a reduction can actually be done by this secondary treatment? This is not yet proven. In relation to this, there are various different private and citizens and academics and so on. The Citizens Committee for Nuclear Energy, which is making a proposal, for example, of using solidification of mortar or other different measures as well to look at different alternatives other than releasing contaminated water into the ocean. However, the Japanese government in its consultations and so on is still not really discussing this very much at all. The media reporting is also the same, but it's very much reporting that, well, the release into the ocean is the only option. And this is one of the issues that we are calling for a more thorough discussion of these alternatives. The fisher community are, of course, also strongly opposed to this naturally, not only from Fukushima Prefecture, but also the fishing co-ops from the different neighboring prefectures as well, and from the whole of Japan as well. Also, 21 municipalities in Fukushima have released official opinions saying that they are either opposed or very cautious about releasing the treated water. I'm a little bit over time, so I'll skip over some more of these slides, sorry. But just to share in conclusion, I think he might actually be joining us today, but there's an illustrator called Kunihiro Suzuki, who we are working with for various projects. And you can see here, this is his picture of the coastal area near Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Actually, the emergency declaration, the nuclear power emergency declaration is still being issued in that area, but we can see the broken Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant just located very near this coastal area. And this text here says, what did we learn from that disaster? The suffering of the people is still continuing. What are we needing to learn from this and carry forward to the future? This is what we want to continue to think about with all of you. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Mitsuta-san, Kanna Mitsuta. So we can see that there is still years passing since the disaster, but there are many different challenges which are not only continuing, but even growing larger as well. This is really a disaster which is ongoing. So next, we will pass over to hear a voice from Fukushima. We have Ruiko Muto joining us here today. Since before the nuclear disaster, Ruiko-san was already working together on, for example, renewable energy, solar, running a cafe focused on sustainability. And she will be speaking to us today about the impacts, of course, the very significant impacts of the nuclear disaster on her as well. So she's been a real community leader for many years, even since before the disaster, and we have a great chance to hear from her now. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ruiko Muto of Fukushima. Mitsuta-san has just spoken about the general situation in Fukushima, so I'll try to make sure that I don't double up on some of the points that she's already shared. And I'd like to share our first photograph. As you can see here, this is a photograph from September 19 last year. And this was the day of the verdict of the criminal trial in which the former management of TEPCO were accused in this trial. We filed for criminal damages in 2012, and in 2015, compulsory prosecution was decided. Since 2017, for around 2 years, there were actually 37 public trials held. Within that, however, the TEPCO management, there was looking at the fact that they knew that there was a risk of a tsunami, a great tsunami of more than 15.7 meters actually occurring in the Fukushima disaster area. But they feared that having some kind of measures about that would impact then their management or the company's finances. Therefore, they hid this and did not take any measures, despite the fact that there were many testimonies and evidence as well. Despite this, however, the verdict did not reflect that at all, and all of them were acquitted. The designated lawyer who was acting as the prosecutor said that this was a verdict which was just going along with the wishes of the government's nuclear power policies. and saying that this verdict was something which completely went against justice. Just the other day, actually, this designated lawyer, or the designated lawyers, sorry, have started the procedures to launch an appeal and submitted this to the courts. So we expect that next year in the Tokyo High Court, the first appeal will be starting. We hope that this will be a chance for us to do all we can to overturn this unjust first verdict. So I hope that you can follow this trial. So I'd like to go to the next photo. As Mitsuta-san just shared in a lot of detail about the situation of the evacuees, so I won't go into the full detail here, but this time with the COVID-19 contagion and so on, this is something which is also impacting the evacuees from the nuclear disaster as well. We've conducted different questionnaires and so on of the evacuees to look at their situation and so on, and we will be hoping to analyze this and share this publicly as well. But looking at the situation of the evacuees and the fact they're already in very severe difficulties, but this is really exacerbating that and having even more impact on them as well. So we'll go to the next picture. This is a photograph of using contaminated wood as fuel for a biomass power plant, which is being constructed in Fukushima Prefecture. And there is actually similar construction in numerous places throughout Fukushima. This photograph is from Ogoe Machi in Tamura. Also in Namie, there is also similar construction already started. And there's a plan for this to be started in Iitate village and also in Yanagawa in Date City in Fukushima as well. In Ogoe, as photographed here, this is actually where they're using the bark, which is very contaminated from the trees. At first, they said that they would not be using this bark, but they changed the plan midway through the process, actually. Also touting that this is very highly safe, but looking at they're using what they call a HEPA filter or HEPA filter, which is designed to supposedly keep the radioactive particles out, but there are also a lot of questions about its effectiveness. And the local citizens are carrying out a lawsuit appealing about this. The bottom photograph here is also the local environmental group in Okoe, and this is their sign saying in opposition to this biomass project, which is burning radioactive contaminated chips. And we can see in front there is actually two pieces of cloth in front of the biomass power plant. These are actually cloths that the local citizens group put up so that they can measure the contamination. In the case of Iitate, first of all, they have already said that it's part of the decontamination process. And so they're actually using the contaminated wood in a way to get rid of this contaminated wood as well. This is being conducted by a company called Iitate Bio Partners, but this company was actually only set up one day before the application, and the shareholders for the company is TEPCO Holdings and also a subsidiary of TEPCO called Tokyo Power Technologies. So we can see they are, the perpetrators in this nuclear disaster, and they are now still involved in this biomass programs in Fukushima, or they're the shareholders in this project. So we can see the connections there. The Fukushima forestry situation as well had for many years been working on building materials or shipping logs for shiitake, but of course this has not been possible for many years now. Rather, the forests are being cleared for chips. And also the cover soil, or in order to take the cover soil after the decontamination, the mountains have really been cut down, and we can see the scenery has completely changed in the area. So this photograph is looking at, well, there are many different projects being done under the government grant in what's called the Fukushima Innovation Coast Initiative, and many different new facilities which are being built. For example, the Fukushima Robot Test Field, the Collaborative Laboratories for Advanced Decommissioning Science, and the Great East Japan Earthquake and Nuclear Disaster Memorial Museum are some of the names of these. On top of that, they are also aiming to establish an international education and research hub for robots, primary industries, energy, decommissioning, radiation safety, health, risk communication, and so on, aiming to have a hub for cutting edge technology and also new industries to be created. The Japanese Reconstruction Agency says that they are basing this actually on the area around the Hanford nuclear facilities in Washington state in the US. Hanford, of course, is the location where the plutonium that was used in the Nagasaki atomic bomb was refined. During the Cold War, there was nuclear development conducted in the area, and local residents were subject to nuclear contamination through tests. Also, it was known to be one of the most contaminated areas in all of the US due to, for example, also leaking of radioactive water into groundwater and so on as well. However, the Japanese Reconstruction Agency is looking at the model of how Hanford had various different companies and research facilities set up in that area. And it's saying that they are using this as an industry, government, academia collaboration model in order to recover the lost industrial base in the area. If we look at one of the bed towns, which is close to the Hanford nuclear facilities, which is the town called Richland, we can see, the logo of the local town is this mushroom cloud. The high school students see this logo, they see this and believe that the atomic bomb was used to end the war, and it's a symbol of what saved the lives of many Americans, and very proud of this. So we can see their basketball team is called the Bombers. In Fukushima, before the disaster, there was actually Atom Sushi, the name of a shop we can see on the bottom right. But in Richland, there's Atomic Burger, the equivalent of this. In this way, we can see that is really this kind of evaluation or positive evaluation of the nuclear industry. And those who are critical of it are treated as, unpatriotic, we hear. The areas in Fukushima before the nuclear disaster, of course, saw TEPCO as this, great company that everybody had to honor and value. Due to the nuclear disaster, the safety myth of the nuclear power plants was destroyed. And finally, the people were freed from the spell of nuclear power at great cost. However, by using Hanford as a model, and by the contents of the kind of international education and research that they're hoping to hold in Fukushima, this is creating a community, a region, once again, which will be dependent on this nuclear industry as well, which is a way to kind of force the victims to keep quiet in a way. Also at the museum, which is being established, there was an experts committee which was established to select the different displays and so on, but this is all being conducted completely out of the public view. There was, excuse me, a newspaper sought to have the minutes from this proceedings being made public. They were made public, but with almost all completely blacked out or deleted. And this is something that the Fukushima Prefectural government is deciding upon, actually. The Olympics were, of course, planned to be held this year, but were postponed. But we don't know what will the situation be next year. The torch relay was scheduled to start from Fukushima. Will that still happen next year? Prime Minister Abe began these Olympics from his lie that the Fukushima disaster was under control. He's also positioned the Olympics as the recovery Olympics and using them to appeal to the world that Fukushima has recovered and to have this kind of social resolution or make it clear societally that the disaster has ended. However, this is of course not the case. The COVID pandemic is still serious throughout the world. But actually, it was on March 11 this year, on the anniversary of the Fukushima disaster, that the WHO declared the pandemic. And it was on March 20 that the torch relay, the Olympic torch arrived in Japan. This was at a time when there was 1,015 people infected with COVID and 35 deaths already. Yet at this time, many people gathered at the exhibition hall to see the torch in Fukushima. And so I think that this torch really and the Olympics issue is also being used somewhat to mask the severity, not only of Fukushima disaster, but also of COVID-19 as well. Many citizens groups conducted monitoring of the area around the torch relay course in Fukushima, and the course itself was relatively low. However, there were many hotspots still around the course, for example, in Itate village and Kawamata town as well. In Okuma village, at an area just 500 meters away from the relay course, this is where there was 2.21 microsieverts per hour monitored. And the relay runners actually who were scheduled, there was even many primary school or junior school students as well. So if the Olympic had not been proposed, they would have been running with the burden of Fukushima's recovery on their backs throughout these very contaminated areas. Next photograph, please. This is a photograph of J Village, which is the location which was used as the base for operations for containment of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant after the disaster. This was actually land which was presented by TEPCO to Fukushima Prefecture in order to ask Fukushima originally to allow the construction of the 7th and 8th reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi plant as well. In 2018, it was returned from the base of operations back to Fukushima Prefecture property. And this is the photograph showing actually local elementary school students planting grass there. However, the environmental NGO Greenpeace conducted monitoring around the car park here, and at the ground surface of around 1 meter, they found that there was still 1.7 microsieverts per hour recorded here. The journalist Mako Oshidari and also the Toyo Keizai newspaper also found some very other important information through their investigative journalism. They saw, for example, at the time that TEPCO returned J Village to Fukushima Prefecture, they didn't conduct the decontamination that was said to be necessary, but only conducted what was called restoration work to return it to what it was like. So that is to return it to 2.5 microsieverts per hour. Also, there was the issue that the Fukushima Prefecture had stopped TEPCO from saying where the different radioactive waste and so on, which came as part of that process, not to announce where that was being stored. And also this fact, when there was a journalist who called on the local government to make this information public, the government actually informed their name to TEPCO. Also, the selection of the Olympic torch relay route, for example, and the money for these operations was around 240 million yen. But this was actually mostly being used as a voluntary contract to the very large advertising company Dentsu, which is also very problematic. There was someone called Noike from Nagano Prefecture who called for public disclosure of the information by Fukushima Prefecture. However, what was made public just came back almost all blacked out. Dentsu, this company, has also been very deeply involved in many other reconstruction efforts in Fukushima and has received or is contracted actually in total to around 24 billion Japanese yen with the national and prefectural government. So we can see these huge profits are being made by certain corporations as a result of these so-called reconstruction. In these 10 years, what has been happening in Fukushima is serving, well, we see these different issues of the nurturing of the safety myth of radiation, the scaling back of thyroid tests, the retreat from radiation education, also the different reusing different contaminated measures and so on. This is all connected to the situation, or it's meaning that they're really reducing the radiation protection, not only of the people of Fukushima, but also people around the world as well. It's also neglecting the evacuees, cutting them off, making the responsibility for the disaster ambiguous, and allowing the nuclear industry to still profit from this as well. When we think about this, this is something that is, very difficult for us to accept. But, when we think about the fact that there are many, many more times of citizens who are working to make improvements, to make good things happen, rather than the small number of people involved in these negative things as well. Therefore, we cannot give up. We need to continue to work together as also creatures on this living planet to do what we can to protect it together. Thank you very much. That's the end of my speech. Thank you so much, Rico. When we see also the situation of the Olympics, COVID-19, and really what we need to learn about, what we need to understand, recognize that is still happening now as well. You've really strongly conveyed that today. The situation of J Village and so on, the fact that this is still going on now is really important for us to know. And as an opportunity to share this with people in other countries as well, we're very grateful for your sharing your presentation. If you have any questions for Ruiko and Mitsuta-san, feel free to add them in the chat and we'll collect them at the end during the Q&A session. Next, we will have an opportunity to hear from a mother from Fukushima. She had once evacuated away from Fukushima and has now returned to live there once again. She is joining us actually anonymously today, so we won't be seeing her face as she's making her presentation, but we'll be sharing some different photographs to illustrate as we go.
皆さんこんにちは。私
Good
は
evening,
福島市在
everybody.
住の2児の
I am
母で
living
す。
in Fukushima
シン
City.
ポジウ
I'm
ム
a
でお話
mother
しした
of
経
two
験はあります
children.
が、
I've
ウェブ
spoken at
会議
different
でのお話は
symposiums
初め
before,
て
but
で
this
す。
is my first time to speak on this
本
kind
日
of
は
web
私たち家
conference.
族が震災後、
So
この
today I'd
9
like to
年
speak
間
to you
どの
about
ように
what
過
our
ごしてきたの
family
か、
has
そし
experienced
て
during the 9 years
新型
since
コロ
the
ナウイルス問
disaster
題と
and
福
also
島の
the
問題をリンクさ
connections,
せな
really
がら、
linking the
福島の
COVID-19
今を一人
situation
のお母
and
さんとして
Fukushima
お
as
伝えで
well.
きたらと
So I'm
思い
speaking
ます。
from the position of one mother from Fukushima.
東日本大震災から
As
9
we are
年とい
seeing
う月
9
日が経
years
ち、
now passing
事
since
故当
the
時2歳の
disaster,
娘と
I
妊
had a
娠8
2-year-old
ヶ月でお
daughter
腹
at
の
the
中にい
time,
た息子
and
が
my
現
son
在
was actually not
小
yet
学
born. I
6
was
年
8
生と
months
3
pregnant
年
with
生にな
him
りま
at
し
the
た。
time, but they are now
2
in
人は
grade 3
元
and
気で
grade
楽しく
6.
有意義な
They're
毎日を
both
過ごしていま
having
す。
very meaningful, very fun every days and living
2011年
healthily
3
today,
月
I'm glad
11
to
日のあ
say.
の日の地震
On
は
March 11,
今思い出しても
2011,
こ
when I
の世のも
remember
のとは
that
思えぬ
day,
異常な揺れでし
I
た。
remember that shaking of the
私は
earth,
その
which was
時、
something that we just
これ
couldn't
は
even
今までに体
imagine.
験したこ
At
との
that
ない
time,
よ
it
う
was
な大
something
変なこ
different
と
to
が起きるか
anything
も
we'd
しれな
ever
いと感じ、
experienced before, and I really
その
felt
予
that we
感は的
were
中してし
having
まいま
something
した。
unprecedented.
それまで原子力発電所
Until
につい
then,
ても
I
放射
really
能
didn't
につ
know
いても
much
無
at
知だった
all
私
about
で
the
すが、
nuclear power plant
日に
or
日
also
に危
about
険を知るこ
radiation. I
と
was
となり、
completely ignorant of this,
7
but
月
day
に
by
は
day, I
生
learned
まれた
more
ての新
about
生
these
児を連れ、
disasters.
西日本にて
And
母
then
子避
in
難を始め
July,
まし
so
た。
just a few months after the disaster, I went
縁
together
も
with
ゆか
my
りもなく、
newborn to
ただ単
Western
に放
Japan
射
in
能汚染の心配が
evacuation.
ないだけで
We
選
went
んだ避
somewhere, of
難先で
course,
した
we
が、そ
chose
れは
this
とても過
location.
酷
We
で
didn't have
辛
any
い毎
connection
日で
there
し
as
た。
well, but just wanting to move to
取
somewhere
り壊
safe.
されるはずだったその住
But it
居
was
は
very
不具合が多く、
difficult, day
1
every
月に
time. We
新築し
were
たば
sent
か
to
り
live
の
in a
福
place which
島の
was
自
actually
宅と
already
は
scheduled
真逆の
for
暮らしで、
demolition, but we were
そ
somehow
こから
able to
来る
move
ス
in.
ト
So
レス
it
や
was quite
体の不
an
調との
old
戦い
place. There
は
was also
退
many
去する
different
まで続
stresses
き
and
ました。
physical stresses as well, and it was a very
誰も
difficult
訪ねて
everyday
も来ない密室
situation.
で、
We didn't
誰
know
からの手
anybody
助けも
there
な
as
い
well, so we're in
幼
a
子た
small
ちに
room,
育児
but
の
with
日々
nobody
に
to help
身
us,
も
without
心も
knowing
限界に
anybody
なり、
around, and
私は
with
次
these
第
two
に追い
very
込まれ
small
ていきま
children
し
just
た。
spending every day there, I
夕
really
焼けに
felt
染ま
in
る
very,
空
very
に
difficult
福島を重ね
situation.
な
And
が
I
ら、
looked up at the
狭く
sunset,
薄暗い台
and
所
I
で
remembered the
子供
sky
に見
from
られぬよう
Fukushima,
なことも
but
あり
I
まし
would just
た。
hide from my children,
平穏
in
な
the
毎日の
kitchen and
中
try
で
and hide
突
there
然
and
訪
cry
れ
where
た
they wouldn't see
あ
me.
まりにも残酷な運
Remembering
命
back to
に
our peaceful
一
days
刻を
that were
さえ
just
感じていま
completely
した。
stolen away, I really felt
その後
so
周りに避難者は増え、
difficult as a
同じ
result
世
of
帯の子を
this.
持つ親同士でコミュ
And
ニティがで
thinking
き、
about this
顔を合わせれ
situation,
ば皆不安
gradually
や
more
迷いを
evacuees
口に
also
し、
came to live near
心を
us as
壊し
well
か
and
けながら
started
も
to
必
have
死に避難生
somebody
活を
to
続
talk
けて
to.
い
We
る
were
よう
able
な
to
状況
share
でし
our
た。
experiences, share our concerns, share our
母
daily
子避難から1
situation
年
with
過ぎ
each
た頃、
other and
原
somehow
発事故
live
の見
throughout
通し
this
が全くつかない
situation
こと
as
と、
well.
私の追い込ま
Around
れ
1 year
追い込め
after
られ
we
た
had
状況を加味
evacuated
し
and
て、
seeing that
主
there
人
was
が
no
福島で
likely
の仕事を
improvement
辞
of
め、
the nuclear
た
disaster,
った
my
1
husband
年、しか
actually
も
decided to
主
quit
人一
his
人で
job
住
in
んだ新
Fukushima.
築の家も売る覚悟を
Just
し、
before the disaster, we'd
避難
only just
先に
built
越し
our
てく
new
されま
house,
した。
but he'd had to live there on
し
his
か
own
し、
for that
主
year,
人
but
は
he
慣れな
decided
い
to
地での
come
仕事
and
に苦
live
戦
with
し、
us in
転職
evacuation.
を繰り返す
But
こととな
moving
り
to
ま
this
した。
area that was somewhere where,
中には
we didn't
社
have
長から
anybody
福
that we
島
knew
のネタ
there.
でバカに
He
された
started a
り、
new job,
福
but
島なまり
he's
を
also
からか
very
われたり
difficult
しまし
there
た。
as well. He was often bullied in
避
the
難
job.
先で
He
は
had people making
私たち
fun
避
of the
難者
fact that
に
he
支援
was
してくださる
Fukushima.
方、よくしてく
And
だ
there
さった方
was,
もたく
of
さんいまし
course,
たが、
many people who were
一部でいじ
supportive
めや
of
差
us in
別、
our place
偏
that we
見
were
は
evacuated,
子
but there
供の
was
話だけで
also
はなく、
bullying,
大
discrimination,
人の
and
世界で
prejudice,
も確
not
実にあり
only
ました。
within children or within schools, but
し
also
かしそ
even
の頃に
amongst
は、
adults
子
as
供たち
well.
もすっかり避難先
However,
の生活
by
に慣
that
れ、
time, our children
幼
had
稚園や
become
学
used
校
to
に通
their
う
new
までに
lives
成
where they
長
are,
し、
and they'd grown up,
私も
so
よう
they
やく
started
自
to go
分
to
自身に
kindergarten
余裕
or
ができてき
school,
まし
and
た
I was
が、
finally able
どう
to,
して
to
も
be able
避
to
難
spend
先
my
の
own
生
days
活
a
に馴
little
染
bit
むこ
more
とができ
myself
ない上に、
without in
主
such
人の仕事も
desperation.
先行きが厳しく、
However, my
金
husband
銭
really
的にも
struggled in order
精
to
神
find
的に
stable
も
work
避
where
難
we were
生
living
活を
as
続
well.
行させること
And
に
we were
限界を
living in
感じ
very
た私た
difficult
ちは、
both
震
financial
災か
and
ら5年目の
psychological
春、
situations
苦
that
渋の選択の
after
中、
that.
福島に戻る
So
こととなりま
around
した。
5 years after the disaster
避
in the
難
spring
先か
of
ら
that
福
year,
島
we
に
made
戻
the
るとな
very
ると、
difficult
放射能への
decision
不安
to
が
move
常
back
につき
to
まといました
Fukushima.
が、
we're
遠く
very
離れた
concerned
縁も
or
ゆか
really
りもな
wondering
い避
about
難
whether we
先で
should move
の
back to
5
this
年間
place
張り
where we
詰め
would
てい
still
た
have to
緊
be
張が解
worried
け、
about
本来の
radiation.
生活に近づ
However,
きつつ、
remembering the very
暮らしも
difficult
精
days
神
that we
的
had
に
been
も
spending
徐
in
々に安定していきま
evacuation,
した。
we found a bit more
福島に
stability when
戻
we
った
came
から
back
に
to
は雇用
Fukushima,
が
where we
必要
were
と、
used to as
長期の
well.
休みや
We
連
still, of
休な
course,
どに
wanted
は
to make
な
sure
るべ
that
く
we
雇
could
用
bring
に
our
参加す
children
るようにしてい
away
ます。
to join recuperation
親も子
programs or
もの
places
びのびと
outside
外
of
遊びを
the
したり、
radiation
同
affected
じ不
areas.
安
We
や
took
気持ちを
every
話したり
long
と、
weekend
心
or
身ともに
every
リフレッシュになっ
holidays
て
and
い
so
ま
on
す。
to go to refresh somewhere with lower
FOE で
radiation
も
levels as
福
well.
島県内で
And
線
we
量が
joined
低い地
many
域に出
different
かける雇用、
FOE
ポカポカ
organized
プロジェクト
programs,
を
for
年に
example,
数
within
回
the
行っ
Poka
てく
Poka
れており、
project several times a
自治
year
体
to
が
go
行
to
わなく
places
てはな
within
らない雇
Fukushima
用を
Prefecture,
ずっと各地の
which
市
had
民団
lower
体が
radiation
有
levels.
志
This
で
is the
続け
kind
て
of
くださ
things
っ
that
て
the
いる現
government
状で
should have
す。
continued, but it was these citizen
国
groups and
にはチ
NGOs
ェル
that
ノブイリ
continued
を
to
見習
provide
い、
these
国策と
opportunities
して行
for
っ
us
て
as
ほ
well.
しいと強く
We
願ってお
called
り
and
ま
we
す
said
が、
that the
な
government
かな
should
か変
learn
わり
from
ません。
Chernobyl and do these as a
そ
state
して震
project.
災から
However, this was
10
not
年目を迎える
realized.
今、風
Now
化
that
し
we are
つつある
approaching 10
原発
years
事故の
since the
問題につい
disaster,
て、
people are
今後どう
forgetting
語り
about
つな
it.
いでいくか、
But how we
非
really
常に
continue to talk
重要な
about
課
this
題
is
だと思っ
something
ており
that
ま
I
す。
think is a very
私
important
は子
issue.
どもたちには原発事故のこ
I
と、
try
放
to
射能の危
teach
険に
my
ついて、
children
福
about the
島の
dangers
話
of
を
radiation
年
and
齢
about
に
what
合う話し
happens
方
in
ではあり
the
ますが、
nuclear
教
disaster
える
in
よ
a
うに
way,
し
of
ていま
course,
す。
that is suitable
し
for
か
their
し、
ages.
各家
But
庭で
it's
どれだ
something
け
that
そ
I
のよう
also
な
find
話をして
very
いるかは分か
challenging.
り
It's
ま
very
せん。
difficult, and not every
福島市
family
教
does
育委
it in
員
their
会で
own
は、
different way
年
as
間
well.
2時間、
Within
放
the
射
official
線教育を
education
行うよう
system,
に
the
と
Board of
義務付けされて
Education
いるよ
says
うな
that
んで
every
す
year
が、
there are 2 hours
私の知る
dedicated
限
to
り、ほとん
radiation
ど授業では
education.
行われていない
But
よう
as
です。
far as I know, this is not
福
really
島の
being
子ども
done
たち
in
が社
classes
会に出
at
たと
all.
き、
When the
何も
children from
自分たち
Fukushima
の
go
身に起
out
きた
into
ことを説
society,
明できないようでは、
the fact
子ど
that
もたちにとっ
they will be
て
growing up
さ
and
らな
not being
る
able to explain what
さら
happened
な
to
る
them,
二
not
重
able
の
to
被害だと
understand
思っ
that.
てい
I
ま
think
す。
that's also a kind of
子どもた
secondary
ちに将来そん
victimization
な
of
恥ずか
them
しい
as
思いをさ
well.
せてはならない。
I don't
そ
want
れ
them
を
to have
伝え、
to
教えていく
experience
こ
such a
と
thing
が
in their future
大
as well.
人
And I
として
believe
の
it's
大きな
very
責任
important
では
and
な
it's
いでしょ
our
うか。
significant responsibility as
そ
adults
し
to
て9
teach
年経っ
them
た今、福島で
about
も
what
人
happened.
々は放射能という
Now
言
that
葉
9
を
years
口
have
に出すことが
passed,
なくなりつつあり、
people are really
原
not
発
even
事故の
mentioning
風
the
化を
word
感じていま
radiation
す。
anymore. And I feel that people are
しか
forgetting
し、
about
と
what
ころどころ
happened.
でフレコンパッ
However,
ク
in
の
many
山が置かれ
places,
てい
we
たり、
still see these mountains
天気
of
予
the
報の最
plastic
後に
bags full of
本日の放
decontamination
射能
soil and so
放
on.
射線量
At
が
the end of
流
the
れた
weather
りすること
reports in
が当
Fukushima,
たり
we
前に
still
なってし
see
まっ
this
た
is what
日常の
today's
中で、
radiation dosage is, and
きっ
this is the
と
kind of
皆心の
abnormal
どこか
every
に
day that
ま
we
る
are
で取れないシミ
experiencing.
のように
So I think
深い
maybe
傷
there
跡
is
とし
kind
て
of
残っているはず
a
です。
stain remaining within everybody that they're
放
not
射能
able
に
to
対
talk
して
about,
人
but
そ
that
れ
is
ぞれの
still
捉え
there
方
as
の中
well.
でも複
Everybody
雑
has
な
their
心
own
境を
different
耳にするこ
understanding
と
of
があります。
radiation and the situations
も
around
ち
it,
ろ
but
ん危
it's
機
also
感を持って
very
暮らしている人もいま
complex
すが、
feelings that people have.
しかしも
There
う
are, of
大
course,
丈夫
many
だ、
people
も
who
しく
are
は
still
もう
living
そのこと
feeling
は
that
考
it is
え
very
たくない、
critical, but there are some people
思
who
い出し
want
た
to
くな
block
い、
it out, who
騒
don't
がな
want
い
to
でほし
remember
い
that,
と
who don't
思
want
って
anybody to keep
暮らしている
talking
人
about
々も
this
多く
as
いるこ
well.
とも事実で
And I
す。
think that's also the
そし
reality.
て世間では避
And
難者ばか
also
りと
there
して
is a
取り上
sense
げら
within
れているが、
society that
実際に
the
福島
media
に
only
暮らす
talks
人の
about
気持
the
ちを知っている
evacuees,
の
but do
とい
they
う
know
声も
what
あ
the
るよ
people
う
who
で
are
す。
actually living in Fukushima
雇
feel
用につ
like?
いても福島の保護
Also,
者か
when we
らの
look
雇
at
用
these
のニーズは
recuperation
まだ
programs,
根
bringing
強くあるの
people,
が
bringing
現状で
children
すが、
out to
その雇用に対する
temporary
捉え方でさえ
holidays and
も
so on
今とな
outside,
っては二分
there
化され
are
てしまい、
still some parents who feel that
中
there
に
is a
は
very
雇
strong
用
need
と
for
い
this,
う
but there
言
are
葉
some
に違
people
和
who are
感や
even
抵
against these kind of
自分たちの
recuperation
住む場
programs
所
that
を
don't
危
want it
険
to
視
be
されている
talked
よう
about,
で嫌
that
な
they
気
feel
持ちに
like
なる。
people are saying that where they are
私た
living
ち
is
は他の
dangerous
地
and they
域のよ
shouldn't
う
be
に
living
普
there
通
as
に楽
well.
しく暮らしては
They
いけ
say
な
that
い
we
の
just want, aren't we
不要
allowed to
とい
just
う
live
言
where
葉が
we are
大
and
嫌
enjoy
い
ourselves like other
という意
people?
見もありま
I
し
don't
た。
even want to hear the words
これを聞い
recuperation
て私
again,
は
for example.
原発事故後どれ
When
だけの
I
福
hear
島のお
this,
母
I
さん、
think it really
保護者
shows
たち
how
が苦
much
しん
the
でこ
mothers,
の
the
9年
parents of
間過ごしてき
Fukushima
た
have
のか、
suffered
そ
throughout
し
these
て
9 years
今も
since
な
the
お苦悩してい
disaster,
る。
and how much they
ど
are
うにも
still
癒されな
suffering
い、
in
払
this
拭で
complex
きない思いの
situation
中、
today.
暮らし、
That they're living
子
in
育
this
てし
way
てい
that,
るこ
they
の現
cannot be
状
fully
を
released from
非
these
常に辛
concerns
く
from this
悲しく、そし
situation.
て
And
悔しく思い
I
まし
feel
た。
very saddened and
危険視
difficult
して、
about
不
this
要
as
にも
well.
積極的に出かけている私
I'm
で
a
さえ
mother,
も、
of course, who
実
does
はそのような
proactively
気持
bring my
ち、
children
痛いほどわ
to
かり
safe
ます。
areas whenever I can
そ
because I
して
feel this
私で
situation,
さえ
but
もそ
even
う
I
思う
feel
時
like
だっ
that
て
in
あ
that
るので
way.
す。
So I
そ
think
れ
that
が
really shows
む
this
しろ人とし
situation
て
as
当
well. And I
然の
think
気持ちであり、
it's a
感情だ
natural
とも
feeling for
思うの
people
です。
to feel as an emotion.
誰もが自分の故郷、
Nobody would want
自
their
分の
own
町を愛した
hometown,
い、
their own
多く
city
の
to be
人に訪
taken
れ
away,
て
and
ほ
they
し
would all
い、
want to
いいと
live
ころだね
there
と
in
言っ
peace.
て
They
ほ
want
し
people
い。
to visit and
な
say,
の
"You
に、
live in a
自
wonderful
分自身
place."
が我が町を否
But
定しているようで、
it's like
そ
people
れ
are
は
feeling
ま
that
る
they
で
have to
自己肯
deny
定
their
感
own
の損失と
hometowns
も言えるの
themselves.
では
It's
ない
almost
で
a
しょうか。
self kind of
そ
denial
し
and a
て
self loss as
誰もが
well.
我が
And of course, everybody hopes that their children can live in a healthy way, want to be able to raise their children healthily without these kind of concerns. And so when we think that we have to live with these kind of sufferings and without these answers to this as well, of course, it would be much easier if we just forgot all of this. And this is something which is perhaps an unavoidable way of feeling in a way. But then if you do that, then well, aren't you protecting your children? Why don't you move away? I just hope that people don't criticize the parents of Fukushima who are already struggling so much with their own difficult decisions, their own situations. As someone who has experienced both evacuation and also choosing to return to Fukushima, I think this is something that it shows these very, very difficult decisions that have to be made, and the fact that there is no one single answer as well. The people of Fukushima are going to be living with the impacts of radiation for decades, centuries from now as well. And we're never going to be returning back to the peaceful, beautiful, kind, gentle Fukushima that we had before. But is it fair that we have to live within such a nightmare? It's just a matter of circumstances that Fukushima became a victim of this contemporary society and the structures of Japan. But 9 years have passed, and we still need to keep living. For the future of the children who have no guilt in any of this, we cannot just feel disappointed, we cannot just feel despair. We have to hope that they can grow up, they can be healthy, and that we can learn from them as well. In the situation of COVID-19, which, it's now been 6 months since we've been living with this situation, and we hear about the so-called new normal. We're living within very different restrictions, regulations on our lives, and so on as well. And this is something which gives a kind of a flashback to the situation in Fukushima at the time of the disaster, having to wear masks, fearing the invisible, issues of discrimination, remembering what happens there. Everybody talks about how much COVID is reminding them of the Fukushima disaster. On social media, we see people from other parts of Japan who say, I feel like I understand what the people of Fukushima were feeling at that time. However, the difference, of course, now is that COVID-19 is not restricted to one particular area, but it's a global issue. So therefore, we of Fukushima are living with COVID and this extra risk as well. This is the fact that we're not able to go to different places as well during the school holidays, for example, in long holidays, to take children to places without radiation. Why is it only us that we're not able to do this? It's very difficult, very concerning for us as well. But the more you know this suffering, the more you want to be able to be kind to other people. This is what I hope that we can do as Fukushima as well, because there is nothing as bad as discrimination and division as we have experienced. Not only COVID, but also radiation issues, environmental issues as well. We need to be able to live with this kindness to other people and to nature, to the world as well, and to connect this and think seriously how we can do this. And I hope that all of you can continue also to listen to and stand together with the people of Fukushima as well. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and really the conflicted situation you're finding in the divisions within community, and really this very difficult story that you've shared with us. Everybody, of course, shares the same feeling of wanting to protect their children, but the fact that people have to experience more suffering is a demonstration of the impact of the nuclear disaster. Really, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. So now we'd like to show one brief video, if we may. This video is part of the Fukushima Educa project, which we introduced at the start. It's still being edited, so this is actually something which has not been made public on our website and so on. But this video will be shown. The sound is in Japanese, but it has English subtitles on the video. So please take a look at this for the next few minutes.
2015年に復興住宅ができたから、でそっちまたみんなで移ってきたっていう形。ね、この家からしたらこの家の半分が半分ぐらいかなって。
2017年に浪江町の東側は避難解除になりましたが、今野さんの住む地区にも人はほとんど戻っていません。
独身だったんだけど、男の人なんだけど、でのんびり暮らすんだって言って、それでずっと相模原に避難してたんだけど、解除された土地に戻ってきたのね。やっぱり家がいいって浪江がいいって言って、あとそっちの隣もやっぱ独身の年配の人で一人でいるんだけども、いつもはいない、時々しか帰ってこないんだよね。あとはもう帰ってきてる人ほとんどいない。この地区は全部でこの500世帯ぐらいあるんだけど、10軒あるかないかくらいじゃないかな、帰ってきたのは。年配の方しかいない。若いとってもじゃないけども、一人いない。そしてね、ここからこれちょうど原発あっちの方なんだけど、ちょうど10キロ地点なんだよね。だから向こうで何か線量がすごい変動する。
今野さんの自宅は解体する予定だといいます。
残念だね。でも残したら後で子供にとんでもない負の遺産を押し付けることになって、この解体800万から1000万ぐらい解体して処理したらかかるだろうと。放射性廃棄物処理しなきゃいけないから。
浪江町は解除になったにもかかわらず、線量の高い地点が残っています。今野さんの家の中や周辺も未だに高いといいます。
ここより家の中の方が高いからね。 0.8 ぐらいあるから。家の中にいれば低いから0.23 でいいだっていう話は全然嘘つきだから。でたらめな話。俺環境省に言ったんだよ。一緒に俺ん家に来て環境プラザの福島にあるさ、そこの所長にね、ちゃんと自分の目で確認して連れてってやるからって、そんな報告は受けてませんって、除染されてきれいになったっていう報告しか聞いてませんっていうわけよ。何倍だったらだから、もうそれが現実だから。そこの入り口なんか250万くらい平米だからね。で 98% がもう不要性のさ、今問題になってるセシウムボールでさ、そっちの下の段のところで800万秒くれるっていうのは実はあるんで、それは女性自身でね来て測った時高いよ。とても 0.1 なんか幻の世界です。
復興五輪と呼ばれる東京オリンピックについて今野さんの思いを聞きました。
オリンピック自体は悪いことじゃないんだけどね。オリンピックを美濃にしてさ、被災者切りするのはダメ。2週間の運動会のために高層マンションね、あそこ豊洲に作ってさ、片や仮設住宅にプレハブの仮設住宅に何年もとどめ置かれてね、でアイクの果てに今度はデロの話でさ、その差は一体何なのって。2週間の選手のために超高層マンションの高級マンションですよね、広いね。おかげさまでそっちに大工さん取られてさ、こっちの移住して家建てようっていう人もなかなか家が建たないし、材料は入ってこないしって、被災者っていうか被害者だよね。被害者ケースだよね。災害というよりは人災だからね。これはね、実験だからさ、被災者っていうけど、それは自然災害のことだよね。人災だから、あくまでもさ。
復興という言葉について尋ねると、
一番聞きたくない言葉だね。絆とか復興なんてのはそんなもの、そんなに軽く言う話じゃない。復興って一旦元に戻ってからさらに再びね、立ち上がることだでしょ。元に戻らないのにそこから立ち上がることになって復興なんてありえない。
はい、ありがとうございました。ちょっと画
Thank
面が
you very much. I hope that you were able to see the video clearly. This will be made public in different languages on our homepage soon as well. So if you did have any troubles viewing it then you'll be able to watch it on homepage soon as well. And actually, Mr. Kono, who joined the video, is actually on the webinar at the moment as well. So perhaps we can have a comment from him for a few minutes. Mr. Kono, if you're willing to share some words with us. Can you hear me? Yes. Hello, good evening, everyone. I usually have my hat on, so I might look a little bit different. Maybe people don't recognize me. How's that? Is that better? You can see me now? So the house that you saw in this video, actually on Thursday, it completely was demolished. It's all gone now. So the demolition was finished then, and it's completely gone now. From July is when the demolition was being conducted. It took about 2 months. And it was planning to be ended within around 1 month, actually, but it took longer than that. But it just finished actually just 2 days ago. Within the video, this was filmed last year, actually. And it was said that it would be about up to 1 million yen, sorry, but it actually ended up costing much more than that as well. You know, it was quite a tough or a strongly built house as well. So it actually took many more days and much more money for the demolition than they said as well. It was actually 1.5 million yen for the demolition there. Usually, usually the demolition wouldn't be done for a very new house. It's for something which is already an old house. So that's why the quote was quite different, actually, because it was a very strongly built house. But once we did tear it down, it was a house that had been built within the most recent earthquake standards and so on as well, because it was new. But then, this actually meant that it was very hard to take it down, actually. Even each pillar, each post was very strongly built. The concrete, it was very strong, all connected there as well. Had to spend a lot of time to do this. And this just finished just on this Thursday. In Namie Town, well, just very close to the center there, almost half of the houses have been torn down now. They're gone. And for those people who knew what the town was like before, it's just completely strange sense. If you come there and you don't know what it was like before, you will see, oh, there's nice new building now, and maybe you see it as something new. But for those of people who know what it used to be like and see that more than half of the houses are just disappeared, they've just been completely taken down. The situation, even last year, this year, a lot of this is progressing even more as well. So we are seeing that, this is really being torn down, being brought down. I have this book just here, so I'll show you, but this is a book called The Town That Was Erased from the Map. And this is really Namie. It's where this is a real situation where that has happened. The area all around my house as well. The people who are living around there moved to evacuate outside of the Fukushima, and are not returning then again to Fukushima. And they were not able to, for example, apply for the government processes and so on as well. And so they're actually just leaving their house there, but they're living in Chiba or living in other parts of Japan. And so it's completely empty there now. There's some elderly people who are coming back to live there. There are 2 elderly men, both living on their own, who have come back and are there again. But, we see that, in their very situation with, no one allowed, no one there. I went there the other day to film and to really share this story and share with people, share with the future generations, to record what's happening, to record this situation and show that this disaster is something which is still happening now. It's not something just in the past. So I worked together with a photographer called Nakasuji, actually. And in March next year, we're planning to have an exhibition of these photographs as well and show a 10-minute short movie to illustrate, to demonstrate the situation of, what is still happening. So there's 2 different cases like this that we're working on as well. And one is a teacher who evacuated, was at the demolition, or filming the demolition of my house and filming the demolition of another house as well, to show this procedure where the city is completely being destroyed. It's coming down. And so we're going to be holding this film screening and exhibition in March of this year. So I invite everybody to take a look then. Those of you who are joining today's session, of course, we also have people not only from Japan, but from other parts of the world as well. And I also see many names of people that I recognize who are joining today's call too. So I'm very glad to see them and see you, and hope that we can continue to work together to do what we can as well in this situation too. And when I heard the testimony from the mother, it just makes me cry when we realize this situation. It's 10 years, but this is not something from the past. This is something still continuing now. The emergency declaration is still going on now. We are still in the midst of the nuclear disaster. We're not only in the midst of the COVID pandemic, but also the entire situation, the entire disaster is still going as well. There's many people also who can't raise their voices. They feel that they want to say something, but they don't feel that they can. If they do, they'll be bullied. If they do, they'll be discriminated against. They're in these very difficult situations as well, and living within such circumstances. And there are so many people like this, so we really have to do what we can. So I'm trying to speak on their behalf as well, not only about my own situation, but all of us from Fukushima, and how we can continue to work together, cooperate, and support. Thank you for giving me a chance to share this comment. Thank you, Mr. Kono. We really hope to continue to convey your stories and to work together with you as well. And it's thanks to people like you from Fukushima who are willing to stand up and share your stories as well that we can do this too. So we've just heard from these different presentations. We're going to end the Facebook broadcasting now. We had about 50 people following the Japanese language Facebook broadcasting, and we have more than 180 people here on the Zoom as well. And so that closes the first half of today's program.